Can you guys give me 2 minutes, please? Thank you.
Of course.
No worries. I can hear someone speaking French in the background.
Yeah, I just messaged
yeah.
her. That's why she went.
Oh, okay.
No problem.
How are you doing, Emily?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, it's really nice weather at the moment, isn't it?
And I've got all the windows shut and a jumper on. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Really?
Oh gosh. Oh.
What have you guys been up to recently, like today and stuff? Anything interesting?
I organised.
Okay, great. I'm back. Sorted. Thank you so much. So it's right at the clock and we're going to start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's day 3 of our World Ocean Week webinar series at Divers for Climate. For those of you who don't know yet, Divers for Climate was formed to bring together divers in the fight against climate change. We aim to motivate climate action throughout the global dive community and to normalize climate conversations. And today we're talking all about blue carbon ecosystems and their role in fighting the climate crisis. We have 2 wonderful speakers and experts on blue carbon ecosystem with us, and Katie and Lucy. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And I'm just going to quickly let you guys introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing, what your research is, and how you got involved in blue carbon. Katie, can you go first?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So my name's Katie. I'm originally from the Isle of Man, but I'm a PhD candidate doing my research out in sunny South Africa. So I'm looking at how we can restore seagrass meadows for the future. So we're looking at how we can do that through practical restoration work, as well as modelling areas where we can potentially plant new seagrass meadows for the future, and also doing a bit of genomics work, so looking at a DNA level how plants are going to respond to climatic stress. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. Lucy, can you go?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, I'm Lucy. Thank you for those of you who are tuning in, and also to Divers for Climate for having me on. I'm a marine scientist, so I have an undergraduate in marine biology and a master's in marine environmental management, and I'm now a PhD candidate at the University of York in the UK. So my research is looking specifically into blue carbon and how our coastal habitats can help us to tackle climate change. So essentially I'm looking at what enables one environment to do this a lot better than another environment. And I do specifically work on salt marshes, so I am about as dry as a marine scientist can be.
That's funny, but yeah, amazing. Thank you girls so much. I think when talking about blue carbon, it's something that's now popped up very widely in recent years. People are talking about it, so I would like you to just introduce quickly what blue carbon ecosystems are in general and where can we find them. How are they so helpful to the ecosystem in the ocean? So could you just tell us a little bit about blue carbon in general, because our audience is made mostly of divers. Lucy, can you go perhaps?
Yeah, sure. So Blue carbon simply refers to carbon that's been captured and stored by marine and coastal ecosystems. So the blue itself is very imaginative. It just refers to the presence of the sea or the ocean. So the term itself was coined back in 2009, and it was due to these amazing habitats needing to be recognised for just how good they are at capturing and storing carbon, particularly when we compare them to terrestrial ecosystems, which traditionally were what we considered these, these superheroes, these nature-based solutions for tackling climate change. When we talk about blue carbon, we're mainly talking about 3 ecosystems. So these are salt marshes, seagrasses, and mangroves. For quite a long time, kelp has been neglected as a blue carbon habitat, which I can explain later on if you're interested. But it now is being a lot more widely recognised as a blue carbon habitat.
Yeah, amazing. They really have popped up in the last few years. Katie, would you like to add anything to that?
No, that was a really excellent summary. I think, I'd just like to draw attention to the fact that how threatened these systems are. So, thousands of hectares of seagrass, salt marsh and mangrove are being destroyed every year. So at least 1/3 of the global coverage of these ecosystems have already been lost. And when they're degraded or lost, the important part of that is that they then become, instead of absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, they are releasing it back out. So yeah, that's important.
That can be a problem.
Yeah.
Maybe Katie, you'd like to run us on why they're so important to our climate, like how can they help us curb climate change, these ecosystems?
Sure. So as all these species are plants, they photosynthesize, which means that they're absorbing harmful carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. And it either buries that in the plant itself, in its carbon-rich soils, or in the root systems below ground. And it can do this, for seagrass, for example, it can do this 40 times more efficiently than the rainforest, which is incredible. So they're a huge carbon sink, which is amazing.
And talking about, that they're being threatened, can you elaborate a little on what sorts of threats they're facing?
Yeah, sure. So all coastal ecosystems are facing the big five of the big 5 threats, really. So we're talking about overexploitation, physical modification, pollution, non-native species, and the big one being climate change. So that means that we're just over-consuming the fish around these habitats, which is leading to physical degradation. Where, for seagrasses, port developments and things like that are releasing sediment into the wood column, which is basically suffocating these ecosystems. Pollution is doing a very similar thing. Non-native species are outcompeting them, or we're just physically taking them out for things like firewood in the case of mangroves. So it's all becoming additive, and we're losing these species at a really fast rate.
Yeah, these all sound quite dire for the climate if things happen to these ecosystems. Lucy, would you like to add anything on that?
Yeah, so I think obviously Katie's kind of covered it, but these habitats, despite how important they are to us, they're some of the most threatened habitats in the world, really. I think we've lost half of our coastal wetlands, which is the collective term for mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses. And that's just devastating. And yeah, Katie mentioned this as well, but we're so interested in these habitats as blue carbon ecosystems, not only because they can capture and store so much carbon, but equally because they can switch from being carbon sinks, so these fantastic stores of carbon, into carbon sources, which are habitats that release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So I've actually got a bit of a fun fact for you, which is I think it's Shark Bay in Western Australia. I believe that's the largest seagrass meadow in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong, but back in 2010, there was a marine heatwave there, and it caused extensive loss to the seagrass, and actually released carbon dioxide that was equivalent to the yearly exhaust of 1.6 million cars. So it's a pretty big deal that we really need to protect them to avoid future emissions back into the atmosphere.
Yeah. Thank you girls for explaining that so beautifully. We're now going to dive a little deeper in your each ecosystem you guys are focusing on in your PhD. So Katie, we'll go back to you. Can you introduce us to seagrass meadows? What are they? How can they help? How do they contribute to the ecosystem?
Sure. So for those who don't know, seagrasses are marine flowering plants. So these species have adapted over millions of years, and they're found in cold and warm water all over the world except Antarctica. So there's about 60 species of seagrass globally. In South Africa, the species we have that I'm specifically working on is Zostera capensis. So that's predominantly what I'm focused in looking on. And they have a whole host of things that we call ecosystem services. So things that these species do for free that benefit us and global biodiversity. So what's great about seagrass, in my opinion, is that it's great for creating habitat for other really important species. So it's called ecosystem engineering, because otherwise you just have mud or sand flats, and then you get this underwater forest, basically. So they're providing shelter and nursery habitat for juvenile fish, which support around 20% of the world's fisheries stocks, which is obviously super important for food for people. They also support other endangered species, so things like turtles and seahorses, and provide a safe place for iconic species like sharks and cuttlefish to lay their eggs, as well as food for dugongs and manatees. They're providing other services like protecting our coastline by reducing wave action. They're improving water quality by oxygenating the water column and stabilizing sediment, which is obviously going to improve the water clarity, which makes it so much nicer to dive in, therefore improving the water quality. They're also communities, so it's seagrass meadows are gorgeous to look at, so that's really important for human well-being, but it's also all the other things that I've talked about, so providing subsistence fisheries or coastal protection, and even their cultural significance is really important as well. So I think the intergovernmental panel on climate change supports people globally, so it's an incredible habitat we're working on, and I feel very lucky.
Wow, amazing. You sound really passionate when you talk about this. It's really brilliant to listen to. Lucy, we'll go to you. Introduce us a little to, salt marshes and the coastal wetlands of Britain.
Yeah, sure. So salt marshes are intertidal habitats. So that means they live between the land and the sea, and they're regularly inundated by the tides. So they're made up of salt-tolerant plants, so things like low shrubs and grasses. And just like you get zonation on a rocky shore, it's a very similar thing. So you tend to get your species that are really adapted to salt water and can withstand it really well at lower elevations, closer to the water. And likewise, those that can't withstand it that well, slightly higher elevations at the upper edge of the marsh. So you can technically get salt marshes around the world, but they tend to prefer mid to high latitude regions. So we do say they're really a temperate species. And as you move more towards the tropics, they become replaced by mangroves, which function in a really similar way. Similar to seagrasses, they like quite sheltered environments. So you can find them on the open coast, but they tend to be found along estuaries instead. So it's really much the same thing, because all of our blue carbon habitats, they do function in a really similar way, and all of the ecosystem services. I could just essentially, repeat a lot of what Katie said as well. So I'll focus instead on what I consider to be the most important benefit that we gain from salt marshes, aside from climate change mitigation, and that's coastal protection. So they have this incredible ability to respond to rising sea levels. So what they can do, the plants that make up these habitats, they're really good at slowing down the waves and trapping sediment that's been delivered on the tides. So what can happen there is that as they trap the sediment, it allows the salt marsh to build up vertically. So it can actually do this. There's been a study around the world which found that salt marshes can actually respond to sea level rise at a rate similar to, or actually faster than, sea level rise. So that's super important for coastal communities. And just in the same vein, there was a study in the UK, and it found that salt marshes can reduce wave height by about 80%. So again, just super important for our coastal communities.
Wow, that's so interesting. I didn't know that. I'm learning so much. Lucy, and I think both Lucy and Katie can talk about this. We want to talk a little bit about kelp forests. You mentioned them earlier on, and I'd like to give you the floor to speak to them a little. Lucy?
Yeah, sure. So the reason I said that they've kind of been neglected in the past is because one of the most important things about our coastal wetlands is that they're sediment-based habitats. So they're plants and they're shrubs, and they have these really, really thick sediment layers, which can be up to like 10 meters deep. And that's primarily where the most of the carbon in these ecosystems is stored. And that's super important because the sediments are waterlogged because they're regularly inundated by the tides. And that means that microbes that would normally live in the soil, break down carbon and release carbon dioxide, can't do their job as well. So that's why the carbon in these soils can be stored there for millions of years. And then on the other hand, you have your kelp forest. So just in the same way that our coastal wetlands photosynthesize, kelp do the same thing, and they're potentially even more efficient at capturing carbon. But kelp, they don't have a sediment base underneath them. They attach to rocks through their holdfasts. So whilst our coastal wetlands operate on capture and storage of carbon, your kelp forests operate on the capture and the export of carbon. And the carbon that is exported from kelp can be reworked into the seabed, or even potentially the sediments of our coastal wetlands. So it's still a super important component of blue carbon, but it's not necessarily a blue carbon store.
Wow, that's very interesting. Katie, do you want to add anything? You're in South Africa, which, our West Coast is home to the kelp forest. Do you want to talk a little bit add a little bit on?
Well, I've only been back in South Africa for my PhD 3 months, thanks to COVID. So I'm actually going out to explore them this weekend, and I can't wait. But yeah, the South African kelp forest has been named one of the 7 wonders of the world recently, which is really exciting. So yeah, I can't wait to have the full My Octopus Teacher experience.
I think we have My Octopus Teacher to thank for that.
Yeah. My friends know where that was filmed, so I've got the hookup.
Amazing. So now we're going to move a little bit towards solution and talk a little bit about climate action. You've all mentioned how these ecosystems, these blue carbon ecosystems, are so effective at capturing carbon and storing them and removing them from the atmosphere, but climate change is also affecting them and effectively wiping them out. So I think by that we need climate action, and we need climate action to protect these ecosystems. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you associate ocean and climate action in the ocean conservation space and how desperately we need it? Katie, can you go?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really difficult to, for individuals to feel like they can make a difference in terms of climate action. I think, we're constantly hearing about all the issues to do with climate action and all the impacts of that and where we're going to be in 50 years' time. So on an individual level, it seems kind of overwhelming to act, but there is so much we can do as individuals to reduce our carbon footprint. Even, when we're talking about blue carbon ecosystems, reducing your carbon footprint is amazing, but, reducing your plastic pollution has just as much of an impact in conserving these ecosystems. So, but yeah, we can talk a little bit more about what individuals can do in a minute, if you like.
Yeah, of course. Lucy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, it's really difficult because they're kind of seen as two separate movements. So you've got your ocean conservation movement, and as Katie said, this is more associated with like the individual impacts that you can do. So you can tell that you're actively involved in conservation if you're able to make switches, so a reusable bottle or opting for more sustainable fish species. But it's really hard to see how your actions are going to make a huge impact on ocean conservation. So there's kind of, there's the ocean conservation movement, and then there's the climate action movement. And they should be completely intertwined, but they're not. And of course, we know how important the ocean, not just blue carbon, but the ocean itself is super important for climate. So, every second breath that we take, the oxygen has come from the ocean. The ocean absorbs, I think it's about 30% of our carbon emissions, and it also absorbs like 90% of the excess heat from global warming. So they should be really intertwined, but I completely get it's really difficult to see how you can really make a positive impact on the ocean through climate action as an individual.
Yeah, no, that is completely true. And you're both science communicators. You're both involved in science communication. What is your personal experience in trying to engage either divers or ocean lovers in general in climate action? How do you think people respond to when you say, ocean and climate should be intertwined, like you said, Lucy? We can go to Katie to start.
I think you get a few different responses, to be honest. It depends. It depends wholly on who you're talking to. I think you get a totally different response if you're talking to friends rather than if you're talking to your parents, or scientists versus non-scientists, divers versus non-divers. As this is a Diving for Climate webinar, if you're talking to divers, you really, you're seeing it firsthand, really, especially when you're on things like coral reefs, where it really is so stark when you get events like coral bleaching. And I think the reason that divers in particular, and why this whole organization that you've created is so fantastic, is because divers are seeing it firsthand and they care because they love these ecosystems. So really, I think when you're communicating the threats and the impacts that we're having, not just on an individual basis, but also on a global scale, is you've really got to come at it from, in my opinion, you've really got to come at it from a place of, how can you get people to love and appreciate these ecosystems? How can you get them to want to learn more? How can you get them to understand where you're coming from without it being this hugely overwhelming thing that just freezes people into inaction? So yeah, it's you've got to have that underpinning appreciation for what you're trying to protect and the bigger goal.
Yeah, brilliant. Lucy, would you like to?
I think that's completely spot on, and I'd 100% agree with Katie there. It's a really delicate balance between trying to encourage action, but not being too overwhelming at the same time. I think there was a I think it was yesterday, or for World Oceans Day, that DEFRA and the Ocean Conservation Trust released their results from their first ever public ocean literacy survey. This was a huge survey. It went out to around 9,000 people in England and Wales, and about 74% of people thought that the greatest threat to our ocean was plastic and litter, and it's really challenging to address that. I think that's a recurring thing, and you're nodding along, like I think you understand that as well. But I find with divers in particular and ocean enthusiasts, I don't think there's I tend to find that they're really aware of the impacts of climate change. As Katie said, like, you can see it, particularly with coral reefs, but it comes back to that, what can we do as individuals? Like, how can we actually help this? And it's a really challenging topic.
Yeah, brilliant. That leads me right into my next question. What can we do as divers, as individuals, to help these ecosystems, to help be part of this climate action movement, to try and get, climate action be normalized in conversations or be in ocean conservation? We can start with Katie.
Okay, here's the big question, isn't it? So, I mean, as Lucy's already said, things like, reusable coffee cups, not buying water bottles. Those companies are just producing water bottles, they're not making water. All these sustainable swaps are great. Choosing more sustainable fish, or if you can, going vegetarian, or buying your food locally is a huge step. You don't necessarily have to go vegan to reduce your carbon footprint. I think if you're buying quality locally sourced food, and obviously macronutrients are hugely important for the vast majority of the developing world. I think also literally just getting involved in conservation initiatives. So there's a ton, if you live by the coast, that's obviously so much easier to get involved directly, but if you don't, you still have your part to play. If you join a charity that does tree planting, that's still climate action on an individual level. Commit a Saturday a month, and that's 12 days where you've gone out and planted some trees. Or also just communicating and educating others in a way where you can have a dialogue. So you're not just lecturing people on how dare you eat that steak, or how dare you buy that water bottle. Like, it's about having an approachable conversation that makes them think about things a little bit differently, and flipping the script on, oh gosh, this is such a huge issue, what can I do? And actually saying, well, I'm one individual, and if me and a million other individuals do this imperfectly, that's going to be a huge impact.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, yeah, that really hits the spot. Lucy, we can go to you.
So I think one of the things I'd say is really just specifically talking about blue carbon, for example, just sing from the rooftops about how incredible these ecosystems are. Like, chat to your friends, chat to your family. It reminds me of this. I absolutely love this quote, and it's people will only protect what they love. They'll only love what they understand, and they'll only understand what they're taught. I think that's such a huge one. And I think as well, people put a lot of pressure on themselves to be perfectly sustainable, and the truth is, if loads of us are imperfectly sustainable, doing what we can without judging others and just doing what we're able to do within our lifestyles, it'll make a big difference. And I think we do need to be aware that a lot of the focus on what you can do personally for climate action is to hold governments and companies accountable, because that's really where the emissions are coming from. So one thing I'd say, I think something super positive you can do for climate action, which you can just do sat at your desk, is to keep an eye out for petitions and campaigns from environmental charities. So, sorry, this one's specifically to the UK, but there's one called Ocean Emergency, which is from Surfers Against Sewage, and it's basically calling on the UK government to better protect our oceans and restore blue carbon habitats ahead of COP26. And I think also in the same vein there, tomorrow, I don't know, Katie, you might be signed up for this as well. They're running an event called C7, which is a free online kind of tutorial thing about how to become an ocean activist. So if anyone is listening now and does want to, a better understanding of what you can do, I'll definitely be going on to that and getting some tips on what I can do.
Yeah, brilliant. And I really like, that you highlight signing petition and, holding government, holding corporations accountable. And just for our audience watching, we'll put the link for Ocean Emergency campaign by the Surfers Against Sewage in our description on our YouTube channel, so you guys can go to that. So we're fast approaching our 10 minutes, so we're going to switch a little bit. Lucy, I want to ask you something specific that I've recently learned that you do is ocean optimism, is call yourself an ocean optimist, and you learned about that term. And then I'd like to get Katie's take on it. So can you tell us a little bit about what it means to be an ocean optimist? Where did you learn it from, and how are you incorporating that in your work?
Yeah, so we've kind of touched upon this already with the way in which you speak to people about climate change and the climate crisis, of trying not to overwhelm them with all the negatives. So ocean optimism is it's a marine conservation movement which aims to create a new narrative of hope for the oceans. So it came about in 2014, actually as a social media campaign. So if you see hashtag ocean optimism, that's where it's originated from. And it's basically a way to share the success of the ocean. So sharing success stories that the public and people can engage with, and moving away or shifting the focus of the environment from this whole doom and gloom thing that is often all we hear about the environment, really. And it's not a way to diminish the huge threats that are facing our ocean, because obviously we really need to tackle them, but it can be tricky because with so much doom and gloom about it, it can cause people to feel quite hopeless and like there's nothing they can do. And it relates back to what we said before. So if people love and understand the ocean or the habitats within them, they're more likely to want to protect them. And I think they'll gain a lot more from hearing about success stories and like all these amazing, restoration attempts, like Katie's PhD as well, all of these really super interesting conservation projects. It makes you feel like you really want to be a part of that, I think. So the first time I actually heard this was in my master's, where it's a phrase that one of my lecturers absolutely lives by, and it's stuck with me a lot, really. It's kind of shaped my interests and my outlook. So I feel really privileged to be working on blue carbon, because I just think it's just such a positive solution for the ocean and for the climate and for people as well. So yeah, that's ocean optimism to me.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And yeah, Katie, you already mentioned it and how you approach people when talking about, the threats our ocean faces. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about what ocean optimism means to you.
Yeah, so I think something that I've just picked up from what Lucy is saying is that, that she heard about it during her master's from one of her lecturers, and that's really what we're talking about here, is that one person that you come across that kind of plants a seed of, okay, there's something I can actually contribute here, like I have a voice or I can get involved, and that seed really, grows. And that's why, we're both here, really, because I had a similar thing where I had a lecturer who was really passionate about science communication, and I don't know, generally in academia sometimes before that it kind of been like looked down upon a little bit, almost like we need to always be talking high level science, and that's really overwhelming for the general public. Like we use all this jargon and technical language, and really we don't necessarily always need that when we're talking about what individuals can do and how we can act on climate action. So I think ocean optimism is great, because if you're just hearing doom and gloom all the time, then you just become apathetic. to the situation. So yeah, I mean, you can be donating, you can be doing citizen science, you can be doing volunteering, you can be educating other people, you can be challenging your governments and local representatives. There's so much that we can do. So I think it's just such a more it's just a more positive outlook. It's more hopeful.
Yeah, amazing. I think you both put it so well, and we really need that. We really need optimism when talking about the place our ocean faces, instead of, everyone feeling overwhelmed all the time and then, oh, there's nothing I can do. So yeah, that's great. And it's kind of like a sharp term just because we're running out of time. I want to get a little bit about diving, because we are divers, and we are. This is what we're here for, diving for climate, but also diving. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about, diving in Kelp Forest, diving in Seagrass, and Lucy, how any individual can explore their coastal wetlands, can explore the salt marshes, what can they find, and if they see it for themselves, then they'll know, oh, that's a beautiful ecosystem that needs to be protected. Yeah, so we can start with Lucy.
Oh, sorry, did you say me? Yeah, sorry, my internet's got
sorry, my headphones are doing.
Yeah, so I'm really ashamed to say that I've never dived in seagrass or kelp, and that is so shameful. But I have said that this year I'm diving in the UK, come what may, so it's going to happen. But I can certainly tell you about exploring salt marshes. So
we'll cheer you on for diving in the UK.
Pardon?
We'll cheer you on when you go diving in the UK. We'll put you on the Divers for Climate page.
Yes, please do. I'll need all the help I can. But yeah, coastal wetlands, they tend to get a bit of bad press, really. They often perceived as these kind of swampy, almost wasteland areas. But I have a particular fascination with them. I think they're beautiful. And for example, we've got in the UK, some of our salt marshes, there's a mid-plant species, which the common name is sea lavender. And in the summer, when it flowers, it is just stunning. The entire salt marsh becomes this meadow of purple, and it's really pretty. And I think one thing I'd recommend, if you get the chance to, is just spend a bit of time near a salt marsh or a mangrove, and you can just see just how dynamic the habitat is. So at low tide, you've got these really exposed areas of mudflat. You get the beautiful wading birds, which are trying to pick out the vertebrates, and then you see this transition as the tide comes in and it becomes high tide, and you can see that it's a nursery for fish species and all sorts. So there's an awful lot to see on a salt marsh that we don't necessarily think of, and that just makes me think. There was a study published a few months ago, and it found that there's actually 34 species of megafauna, which is just a large animal that's bigger than, say, 45 kilograms. And there's 34 species of these large animals that actually use salt marshes, ones that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So in South Africa, they can support hippos, zebras, lions, and then in southeastern US, you've got your sharks, manatees, dolphins, and I was supposed to work down in coastal Louisiana, which would have been amazing, but it didn't happen in the end. And on my risk assessment, I had to write about crocodiles. I thought that was really cool. I don't know how that would have gone through on the risk assessment, but it's something you don't associate with salt marshes. So they are a real treat if you get the chance to go and visit them.
Brilliant. Now I really want to explore salt marsh. There's none near mine. But yeah. Katie, tell us all about diving in kelp and in seagrass, if you've ever been diving in seagrass.
Yeah, so due to lockdown, I actually went back to the Isle of Man, and a really lovely positive outcome of that was actually getting to dive on the Isle of Man for the first time. was amazing, and getting to dive in seagrass. So in the UK, in the Isle of Man, we have a species called Zostera marina, which is I guess the sister or the cousin of what we have here in South Africa. And it's just it's a beautiful plant actually. It's got really long leaves, and if you've got like a little bit of tide, it just kind of sways in the water. It's yeah, it's quite magical actually. You know, you get like little anemones attached to the leaves, and you'll get seals swimming by you, checking out what you're doing, crabs and all sorts, tiny little bait fish and things. It really is just, you know, this whole mini forest under the sea. Here, I don't unfortunately get to dive in the seagrass here. I've done a bit of free diving, but generally the seagrass species here is intertidal. So when I'm doing my research, I just go when it's low tide. But yeah, last year when I first moved out here for my PhD, I did get to go in the Kelp Forest. The water here is cold, hey. It like really takes your breath away. But yeah, the Kelp Forest is insane. I don't know if anyone else has ever felt like this, but honestly, I just felt like very, very small, and just yeah, just like you get really lost in it. Actually, it was really incredible. Like you just feel like there might be a small pajama shark just around the corner at any point, or an octopus, and then you open out into these clearings where you've got these insanely coloured walls with just urchins and sponges, and you've got purples and oranges, and it's just, honestly, it's immense. So yeah, I would really recommend.
Yeah, you're making me miss the Kelp Forest so much.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, diving in the Kelp Forest, diving in the Great African Sea Forest in Cape Town is absolutely breathtaking. I think everybody should at least do it once in their life. Yeah, so we're going to switch on. We have two questions that I'd like to ask you girls that we received on Instagram from one's very divey wise and one's a little bit more about climate action. So we'll go with the climate action one first. Is there any citizen science initiative you can recommend that actively works in restoring these ecosystems? These ecosystems meaning blue carbon ecosystems, or it can be the ecosystems you specifically are working on. So is there any citizen science initiative you'd like to recommend to our audience? Lucy, we can go to you.
Yeah, sure. So I think the two, again, I'm sorry, these are UK based, but the two that I'd really recommend are Project Seagrass and the Ocean Conservation Trust. So particularly with the latter one, this is restoring seagrasses in the southwest of England, so Plymouth, around Devon, Cornwall and the Isle of Wight. And I think there's quite a lot of diving opportunities as well for volunteers, so that can involve actually collecting seagrass seeds, but also in planting them as well. So you're really actively involved in the actual restoration side of things. But I think as well, particularly for blue carbon, it's not just the restoration of the habitats that's super important, but also the conservation of them. So it's really important for us to be aware of the extent of the habitats. So things you can do whilst you're diving, if you choose to dive in a seagrass meadow, which by the sounds of it sounds so, yeah, something I like to do as well. One of the things you can do is log your findings onto Seagrass Spotter, and this is a worldwide app which was created by Project Seagrass. And then there's also the Sea Search project, which is in the UK, which involves recording different species and habitats. So a few diving options to get involved with there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I've noted them out, and again, to our audience, we'll link them on our Instagram and in the description for when the YouTube video gets uploaded. Katie?
Yeah, those are the two main ones I was going to recommend as well. But with Seagrass Spotter, the project Seagrass made, I mean, you can record your seagrass findings all over the world. So that's, you know, I'm sure there'll be people listening from from all over the world on this webinar. So yeah, if you know of a local seagrass meadow near you, you can just go on and record that. And also, so Sea Search is a UK-based thing, but even if you go into your salt marshes or your mangroves or your seagrass and you just make a species list of everything you see and maybe take some photos, if you upload those to something like iSpot or iNaturalist, that's also hugely important, because it's basically an online community where you can collect individuals contribute to biological records, and the online community will like double check that what you've found is the right species, and then scientists can actually use that data set to look at if population ranges are expanding or decreasing, if maybe find that species in an area they didn't know existed, because if you have 1,000 people all over the world, even more than that really, there's over 1 million records on iNaturalist now. There's probably even more than that, to be honest. Then many hands make light work, and that's a hugely valuable resource for science.
Yeah, brilliant, amazing. Thank you, girls. Thank you, girls, so much for telling us all about this. We'll definitely upload the information on our website to let the audience get involved. So our last question what was your most memorable dive experience? And yeah, we'll jump to Lucy and then go to Katie.
Yeah. So this is not to do with any blue carbon habitat, but it was I think I've been spoiled. This is why I haven't dived in the UK yet, because I learned to dive in Palau in Micronesia. So nothing is ever going to live up to that. And it was just the most stunning. Honestly, I can't even tell you. So I've got two dives I can tell you about. And these were actually, both of these dives were the day after I was a qualified diver. So really spoiled completely. One of them was in an area called the German Channel, and it's a known cleaning station for manta rays. So there was a little spot we just knelt at and just waited, and they just came in all their glory, gliding, swooping, and it's just incredible. And then my second dive was a bit of a different one, really. It's called Blue Holes, and it's basically on the surface of the reef plateau. So there's these these big cavern holes, and you dive down them. So I think we dove down to about 30 meters, 28, 30 meters, and then you come out on the other side, this exposed reef wall. And we had, so turtles are my all-time favorite marine animals, and we saw 8 different turtles, so hawksbills, green turtles, and then to the right of us we had I think it must have been 20, 30 grey reef sharks, and it was just amazing. Yeah, beautiful.
Oh wow, amazing. And this was your dive after your qualification dives.
Yeah,
my goodness. You have
ones, that's why I'm spoiled.
That's brilliant. Oh my god, wow. Yeah, Katie, what was your most memorable dive experience?
Wow, how do you follow those? Those really do sound incredible. Very jealous. No, I was recently diving in Sadiyah on the east coast over here, and got to see a leopard shark for the first time, and garden eels, which was kind of incredible. I don't know. Yeah, it was just when you see all these photos of these iconic or really amazing animals on Instagram and things, you just think, oh wow, that'd be amazing to see in real life. You just have this moment of realization, like, oh my gosh, this is real. Which is my favorite thing about diving. My favorite dive though is my 100th dive that I got to do in Japan. Also, I was super jammy there. It was just we'd been there for a month doing research looking at how coral communities are moving into the subtropics due to climate change. So it's tropicalization studies we were doing, and it was the very last day of our trip, and our captain let me do like a cheeky 99th dive. It was like 15 minutes so that I could do my 100th, and that'd be the last one we did. Otherwise I'd probably end up in a quarry or something, which is fine, but it's not Japan. And yeah, it was just this beautiful reef that we dived a load of times before, but then yeah, just like the sun came out behind the clouds, so there was sun rays just like shining on the reef, and it kind of brought out all the colors of the coral, and there was these silver bait fish in the water, so it looked like the water was sparkling. And yeah, it was just like the girls that I went with, we just had such an incredible time, and it was just lovely to be there with them doing something I really loved, and you know, it was just perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Amazing. Well, yeah, thank you girls so much for coming on and telling us all about blue carbon ecosystem. We really appreciate it. We've come to the end of our webinar, and it was really fantastic having you on. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's it for us. Thank you for coming. Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It's been lovely to chat.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been, yeah, I hope people can take some things away from this that they can implement. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. You girls have been most informative. Yeah. So thank you everybody who came, who joined us to listen to Lucy and Katie. The recording will be uploaded in a few minutes to YouTube, and in the next few days we'll upload every information that needs to be uploaded from this webinar onto our website and in the description box. So thank you everybody, and have a good night or morning wherever you are. Thank you.